Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we will continue our discussion with Dr. Syed Hassan Bukhari, a physician, historian, consultant with Character Education Foundation, head of India desk at South Asia Times, Islamabad. The topic today is 200,000 rapes, 3 million murders, and genocide, the real story. So, Dr. Hassan, assalamu alaikum to you and welcome.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you.
Okay, so today we're going to have a hot discussion. So you're in the hot seat. Okay, I hope you're ready for some uncomfortable discussions and tough questions today.
Sure. Shoot.
Okay, before I begin, you have an article on the South Asia Times entitled Bangladesh, the Non-Bengali Genocide. And I would like to quote you on it because I feel exactly the same thing. So here's a quote of what you've written, and I think it reflects both of ours first, and I would like to start with your quote. It says, even if only one woman is raped, the crime is heinous and must be severely condemned, regardless of the rapist and murderer's identities and allegiances. I agree with that 100%. I think you have actually reflected my sentiments on this pretty well as well. Okay? Anybody who did this is a heinous crime, must be severely condemned. Before we continue, if viewers asked for some books on the history of Pakistan they can read, would you recommend any objective books for people who are of Pakistani origins or maybe not even from Pakistan who can read some books in English?
Yeah, well, it all depends on the topic as well. Because Pakistan history, it's a vast subject. For instance, if you want to read more about the early years and the formative phase of Pakistan or before the Pakistan movement, then I guess among the Pakistani sources, Chaudhry Muhammad Ali's The Emergence of Pakistan is absolutely a must read. And also Khalid bin Said's Pakistan, the formative phase is also pretty good. Then if you want to know about the Indian National Congress point of view, you can read it in Raj Mohan Gandhi's books. He's a grandson of Mohandas Gandhi. And also India Wins Freedom by Abul Kalam Azad. Now that would reflect the Congress point of view. And regarding the British point of view, the Mountbatten Papers can be studied, and Freedom at Midnight, it's also okay. And then there is a good book by an Indian jurist, Sirvai, partition about the partition of India. I've forgotten the exact title of that book, but the author's name is H.M. Sirvai. That is also worth a read. And if we are talking about the history of Pakistan before 1971, then obviously Ronak Jahan's Pakistan's Failure in National Integration, that's a good book to start off, especially if you are looking at the problems between East and West Pakistan and the Ayub Khan era. And then there are other sources from frontline observers like Qudratullah Shahab's some chapters about the 50s and the 60s and how Pakistan was ruled during the time period. Then if we move on, if we are talking about the history of the army or the Pakistan's military history, then I think the most better book that I would recommend, if one would ask me a single book, then I would say Cross Swords by Shuja Nawaz is a fairly comprehensive account. And if we are talking about the 1971 debacle, War and Secession by Sisso and Rose, it's a must read. And Kamal Matinuddin's East Pakistan Tragedy, I think it's titled, I've forgotten the exact title, but it's Kamal Matinuddin. He was a lieutenant general in the army, and his book was represented the official research conducted by the army in about the 1971 issue. Then yes, that must be read. For the Awami League point of view, Kamal Hussein's book, Kamal Hussein served as Minister of Law in Bangladesh as well, and that book should be read to read about the Awami League point of view. About the non-Awami League point of view, Shariful Haq Dalim's book can be read, and he was an officer in the Pakistan Army who rebelled, and then he also became anti-Mujibur Rahman and anti-Awami League. So if you are looking for that, you can read that. and so on and so on. The list will go on. But yeah, I think these books about these topics, they will cover the earlier years. The recent years now, when things aren't that much old, it's difficult to find much objectivity about it. For instance, if you want a book about the Imran Khan years or the Nawaz Sharif years from 2013 to 2017, I doubt you'll find an objective account about that.
Or not
Um,
written yet, probably.
yeah, well, they have been written. Salim Safi has written some, but we all know that.
Salim Safi.
Well, if anyone is reading Salim Safi, then I guess he would do better to just watch cricket matches, I guess.
Yeah. Two more books I want to pick you on. So one is by Brigadier Siddiq Saleh, Witness to Surrender.
Yeah, that's also a very good book. That's also a very good book.
Also, Dr. Muhammad Abdul Momin Chaudhry, who was a Bengali nationalist, and he wrote about the myth of 3 million, right?
Yes.
So just,
and
okay.
Yes. That's also a must read because it's from a person who actually fought against Pakistan.
Correct.
And he analyzed the situation quite objectively. I must tip my hat to him. And also Sharmila Bose, yes, she deserves a mention. She was the only one who tried to do objective research, at least, about this topic.
Okay. Okay, proceeding. So once again, before I come to the topic, one thing a lot of people have this question, and it comes up in conversations at dinner tables and families all the time. Why did the founder of Pakistan try to impose Urdu as the national language? Because I've had lots of conversations with Bangladeshi people and older Bangladeshi generation, and they thought they said the sentiments at that time, they were hurt considerably about that, because they said, a lot of people didn't, although they spoke Urdu, but they were not fluent in it, etc. And to impose a national language that overwhelming population of Bangladesh was not familiar with, not fluent in, they thought that laid the seeds of anger, which fermented itself and then became 1971. What are your comments on that?
No, not many people were familiar with Urdu in West Pakistan either. It is still only about 7.6% of the Pakistani population are native Urdu speakers. 93% don't speak Urdu.
Right.
Now, for instance, in Punjab, they speak Punjabi. Yeah. And I've met a lot of people who don't know how to speak Urdu. They speak Punjabi. And especially in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, they speak Pashto over there.
Yeah.
And in Sindh, they speak Sindhi over there. The textbooks, they are in Sindhi. So they teach their children the basic things in Sindhi. Nothing wrong in that. But the national language is still Urdu. Because you see, it was not about a language that was unanimous. Pakistan was a very diverse country. When we are talking about a national language that serves as a bond between the people all around the country, then Urdu had a unique plus point. The majority of East Pakistanis could understand some Urdu at least.
Yes.
The majority of Punjabis could at least understand some Urdu at least. And majority of Pathans as well, Sindhis as well. So this was nobody's language actually. This language, its center was in the UP that was left in India. So it was the neutral language. And also a lot of the Indian Muslims' cultural and capital was concentrated in Urdu. This was another reason. You see, one of the greatest masterpieces composed by Muslim India and regarded all over the world is the Sirat al-Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam by Shibli and Nadvi.
Yes.
Now, Shibli and Nadvi wrote it in Urdu.
Yeah.
That is a masterpiece of Urdu literature and Islamic history.
Yeah.
Similarly, you talk about Musaddas-e-Hali. Now, that is a poem that is absolutely incredible. And it tells the history of the Muslims, the aspirations of the Muslims.
Yeah, also the decline. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in Urdu.
Yeah.
And if you talk about the peak philosopher that Pakistan has, Muslims of India have produced, it was Iqbal. And he also wrote in Urdu and Persian.
Yeah.
So Urdu had a lot of cultural capital with the Muslims. Even the educated Muslims of Bengal, they were well familiar with Urdu works. They still are. Now, when you talk about other languages, There are things, there are many epics in Punjabi, in Pashto, in Sindhi,
Sindhi.
and in Baluchi even, and in Bengali as well. But nobody knows Bengali in West Pakistan. Nobody knows Punjabi in Bangladesh. Now, if you were to drop in inside Dhaka, you might find some people who would understand Urdu. But you would not find a single guy who understands Punjabi. You go to Peshawar, you speak to them in Punjabi, nobody would understand what you're talking about. Now, Punjabis constitute 52, 53% of Pakistan right now. So, by same logic, should the Punjabis be offended that Punjabi isn't the national language of Pakistan?
But let me make
But
another
we
argument.
we have to understand the Bengali side of this as well. You see, the problem was not that much about language. If you look at the language agitation, it was led almost exclusively by the urban middle class.
Okay.
The question was first raised by Dharendranath Datta. Dharendranath Datta was a Hindu member of the assembly, and he was a Congress member. And Dharendranath Datta had started his career from agitation against British in 1905 against the partition of Bengal, a partition that the Muslims wanted and the Hindus wanted to annul. And the Hindus successfully had it annulled in 1911. And that was the beginning of Muslim nationalism modern Muslim nationalism in Bengal because of that incident. Because the Hindus, they showed so much hatred towards Muslims in Bengal, and they said, no, we are not going to let the Muslims have another province of their own in Bengal. We dominate them in Calcutta, we'll dominate the hinterland as well. Dhaka wouldn't be separated from Calcutta. That was the argument. So, but the same Dharendranath Datta became a champion overnight of Bengali language when he was already, if you had asked Dharendranath Datta, should the country be partitioned? He would have said no. Congress was against partition. What was the language of India? Hindi. So Dharendranath Datta was absolutely fine with Hindi being the language of East Bengal as a national language. But he had serious problems with Urdu. So that tells you something right there.
Yeah.
But you can't say that the Muslims were so gullible that they were fooled by the Hindus. No. The argument was that people were thinking that the national language was going to be so powerful a tool that all jobs would require complete proficiency in national language, and all the examinations, especially the competitive civil service examinations, would be taken in Urdu. Now, even today, they are taken in English. I actually
English.
took
Yes.
that exam. I qualified that exam, and I attempted it completely in English 75 years after Pakistan's birth.
Yeah.
So but you couldn't know in 1948-49, the students in Dhaka University, in Rajshahi, in Chittagong, they were worried that there's no doubt that Urdu wasn't the language of anyone, but in West Pakistan, there was more Urdu than in East Bengal.
Yes.
And West Pakistan was also more educationally advanced, especially in higher education at that time.
Yeah.
If you look at the civil service, Pakistan only got one Bengali civil servant out of 80.
Yes.
1 out of 80 was inherited by Pakistan, despite the fact that 56% of the population of Pakistan lived in East Bengal.
Yeah.
So they were worried that in the job market, they're already down,
Yeah.
and they would be pinned more down because of Urdu.
Because of the language.
So that is why they opposed Urdu. So the Qaid-e-Azam, he actually said that the local language, the province's language, that is going to be Bengali, that is going to be whatever you decide. And the constitution hadn't been made then. So the agitation could have taken a more constructive route, and the West Pakistanis could have behaved more tactfully as well. And had the point been sold in such a way that, see, Urdu is going to be a national language, a symbol, but there's going to be complete provincial autonomy, and you are going to have it all your provincial exams in Bengali. And at the federal level, it was always going to be in English. It still is. So, but the problem was that instead of engaging with them, the West Pakistani, and they were dominating the government, they simply said, oh, these are Indian stooges, these are Hindu stooges. Now the Hindus were fanning the flames, but there were genuine grievances as well, like the one I have mentioned, genuine insecurity. So that should have been tackled, but it wasn't tackled. It was actually ignored. And it was always linked with the problem of provincial autonomy. The Bengalis, they wanted provincial autonomy from day one, and they should have got it because it was so far away and there were other problems. But the West Pakistanis, they were wedded to the model of centralism. And I don't think that centralism was such a good idea for a country which was so separated in space.
1,600
with
kilometers away.
with a hostile country in between,
In
and there
between.
was a very strong hostile minority within East Pakistan
Within
as
East
well.
Pakistan.
So these issues must have been coolly considered and then decisions taken. And actually, the agitation didn't occur when the Qaid said it. He had immense prestige. The agitation, the real rabid agitation, that broke out in 1952.
Yeah.
When Nazmuddin, a Bengali, said that Urdu was going to be the national language, and then the Bengalis, students in Dhaka, started the agitation, and then 5 were killed. Now, and these issues were faced by India as well. In Maratha, almost 70 or 80 were killed. There's also a monument there, like there is a monument to the Bengali language martyrs in Dhaka.
But
so these things were there in India as well. But the Indian state was more powerful, and East Pakistan was so far away that these problems, they did get out of hand. So when this problem did get out of hand, then I think the only better solution was to make a compromise and make 2 national languages. And that was eventually done. And after that, the language issue didn't surface anymore.
Okay.
So if anybody says that this was a main reason, then I just say to him that it was conceded in 1954, after 7 years of Pakistan's birth, that Bengali was going to be the national language. So that problem was solved fairly quickly.
So let me tell you something from my experience. And again, it's a hypothetical question. We can only discuss it from a historical lens. When I meet a lot of Bangladeshi people today, especially in the Darul Ulooms, okay? So, I helped, I helped aid some Darul Ulooms in Bangladesh. So I have a lot of contacts with them. And almost exclusively, all of them have knowledge of Urdu. Versus those Bangladeshis who don't have any association with the Darul Uloom system, don't have knowledge of Urdu. Okay, so it's because of Islam they have some working knowledge of Urdu. Okay, so that makes me think: was it practical and viable to actually say maybe Arabic should have been a language of Pakistan, like what Israel did? They actually switched to Hebrew when they had no working knowledge of the language.
No,
would that work?
Had I been alive in 1947-48, I would have supported Arabic because you see, perception is more important than reality. You can say 10 times, 20 times, 30 times that scarcely anyone knows Urdu as a native language in West Pakistan as well. But in the Bengalis' minds, it was the language of West Pakistan.
West Pakistan. Yeah.
So, but Arabic wasn't the language of West Pakistan or East Pakistan. It was the language of the Quran.
Islam,
and with a little hard work, had we been prepared to put in the hard work, Arabic could have worked. But this proposal was touted as well in the early years of Pakistan and was quickly shelved because Pakistan was almost exclusively led by an elite that was secular minded. And that elite completely ruled out Arabic. They said it was impractical. And everything appears impractical from afar, but if you work with a strong will, you make it practical. Hebrew was a dead language which was resurrected. Ideological states function like that. They make the impossible possible. But we never actually were an ideological state, unfortunately, and that was the biggest reason that the country broke up. And that is also a very big reason that the country is faring so poorly these days, because we set out to make an ideological state, but we made a rentier state, an exploitative state. So that is why the people are getting crushed in both Pakistan and Bangladesh. And it hasn't worked well so far because the Muslim conscious and the power of Islam could only have manifested itself had it been unleashed on the society, had it been said unapologetically that we are Muslims, our ideology is Islam, and yes, we can make Arabic a national language as well. It has nothing to do with the Arab cultures. If Arabs renounce Arabic today, would I stop reading the Quran in Arabic? No. The Arabs can do whatever they want. They can recognize Israel. They can become apostates. They can say Islam is wrong. They can do whatever. They are free to do whatever they can. But Arabic does not belong to the Arabs alone.
That's right.
Allah himself revealed the Quran in Arabic
Yeah.
So this language is a common heritage of all the Muslims.
All Muslims. So would you summarize, the conversation we've had is one of the most powerful unifying forces between East and Pakistan could have been Islam, one of the very powerful unifying forces, and it was ignored by the secular elites of the time.
Yeah, it was ignored. Yes.
Okay.
Even, Nishtar, he was always, he was one of the frontline leaders of Pakistan movement, and he was always shuttled aside in the early years, and he never received office worthy of his stature in the Pakistan movement and in the Muslim League. And there was only one reason, and Sikandar Mirza himself in his biography has been recently compiled, and it's a direct quote that he's a fanatic. Sikandar Mirza said Nishtar is a fanatic. Keep him away. He's a fanatic. He wasn't a fanatic. He was just a practicing Muslim who wanted Pakistan to follow its ideology.
Yes.
That is why they said, no, Nishtar, just keep him away. So when you're doing secularism and touting Islam, why would the Bengalis accept that you are actually building an Islamic state when you're doing all the other skullduggery? But when it comes to Bengalis, you start saying, oh, Islam.
Yes.
So I am with the Bengalis on that score, that the West Pakistani elite was in power. They were much more powerful than the Bengalis, and they were not doing anything about Islam. But whenever it came to the Bengalis, they said, oh, you are Hindu agents, you are Hinduized Muslims, we are better Muslims. What is this nonsense?
Yeah. So let's turn to our topic now. So, as you know, my father was deployed in Dhaka right before the war, as part of the civil service from West Pakistan. My family, my brothers and sisters went to school in Dhaka. So I know family history. Also, I've thoroughly read history books like Witness to Surrender, Friends Not Masters by Ayub Khan, and I've seen speeches of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. Okay. And there is a clear discrimination, bad words, curse words used for the Bengalis, right? Towards then the citizens of East Pakistan. Was that acceptable behavior? Why was that allowed?
No, that was completely unacceptable behavior. That was racist behavior. That was wrong on all counts. If you're a Pakistani nationalist, even secular, that's wrong. If you're a Muslim, that's wrong. If you are a decent human being, that's wrong. You see, it doesn't make any sense that you talk about anybody that way. But let's put things into perspective. There was also a lot of that racist stuff from the East Pakistani side as well.
Okay.
Shala Punjabi was the term that was used as a derogatory term for everybody from West Pakistan, notwithstanding the fact that almost half of West Pakistan isn't Punjabi. And you see, there was, from the start, the West Pakistanis had this complex that they are better.
Okay.
And this was a superiority complex that was completely rooted in false premises. But due to this superiority complex, these things appeared. The Bhutto and Ayub Khan's, even some statements, and other people from West Pakistan, the bureaucrats especially, who were dealing with the Bengalis as deputy commissioners, assistant commissioners, superintendents of police, etc., etc. So this racism was exhibited by them, and they thought of themselves as successor to the British lords and the Bengalis as some subject population. And that racism drove a wedge in the unity of Pakistan from very early times. But if we look at the other side of the coin, the situation isn't much better. From the start, even many West Pakistanis did actually do good things in East Bengal. They earned much love there as well, like General Azam Khan. But the thing was that these West Pakistanis were exceptions and not the rule. And similarly, those East Pakistanis not exhibiting racism towards their West Pakistani counterpart were also in a minority, unfortunately. And whenever they used to wield some authority, many of them actually did turn fairly savage in their racism. I'll narrate one example. My paternal uncle, he was a student at Nishtar Medical College, Multan. Now, in medical education, whenever you go for your final exam, Viva, there are two examiners. One is the internal examiner, that is from your own college, and one is the external examiner who comes from somewhere else. He can come from anywhere in the country. Now, the examiner who came in from the for the anatomy exam in the first professional examination that my uncle took, he was from Dhaka. And what he used to do was that in anatomy, there are bones and stuff like that, and you study that, human bones.
Yeah.
So he would take a bone and he would wrap it in a towel,
Mhm.
and he would only expose about this much part of that bone. And then he'd start asking questions about it.
What is
Now,
it?
you
Yeah.
don't even know the bone is wrapped in the towel. You don't even know if it has come from the hand or the foot or anywhere in the body.
Okay.
And he's showing you this little part and he's asking you questions and you don't know, and he's failing them all.
Okay.
And he failed the majority of the class.
Okay.
And the next year, the same Nishtar Medical College examiner, my uncle's teacher, he went to Dhaka Medical College.
Okay.
And that guy was the internal examiner. So he also did that thing with every student, wrapping it in the towel. And the students couldn't answer. But then he would say the student to stay in a seat, and then he would remove the towel, and then he'd ask questions, and they had prepared. So most of them passed. And then he said, "Brother, these are our kids. These are our students. What were you doing back there?
Yeah.
What revenge are you taking from these kids? What have these kids done to you?" But that was the level of hatred and racism from that side as well. Unfortunately, both wings of Pakistan failed in their Islamic and human responsibilities, and that's how the tragedy was born. Now, the West Pakistanis were in more of a position of power, so you could say that they were a bit more responsible. But it doesn't change the fact that it takes two to make a quarrel.
So let me tell you my observation, and this is just my anecdotal observation here in 2023, right? So I've lived outside of Pakistan most of my life, and I've interacted with people from Bangladesh. I also know my own people because I am Pakistani. I have not come across many people in Pakistan who say anything derogatory about the citizens of Bangladesh today. I'm not talking about 1971, I'm talking about today, right? But I meet people from Bangladesh all the time who say things and about me. I wasn't even born at that time, who automatically ascribe me to this sort of thing, to the point where I know this is a long conversation, but I'd like to point this out. So one of my relatives is a retired from Pakistan Army, lives in New York, okay, and he lives near a masjid which is primarily Bangladeshi musallis and people who come there. So for years during Ramadan, what used to happen is sometimes the imam used to be on vacation or something, and they used to tell him to go lead the salah in Ramadan. 2 Ramadans ago, they had no idea he was from Pakistan Army. They knew he was Pakistani, that's it. So for some reason, 2 Ramadans ago, this topic came up, and he told them he was retired Pakistan Army. This is Ramadan. So after the salah, they used to sit down at Dastarkhan and open their fast. That day, when he sat down, the guy who was distributing the food, they come around, they give everybody food, dates, whatever. They skipped him deliberately in the line, did not give him food. And then from that point on, the mosque never gave him food to open his fast, nor allowed him to lead the salah, simply because he was a retired Pakistan Army. And of course, he got commissioned years after the 1971 war and retired, many years later. So I am telling you from my common observation in Mecca, in Medina, in the Middle East, Africa, Europe, America, there is still discrimination in the people of Bangladesh, even today, against Pakistan. And I don't see that in the people of Pakistan. In fact, there's so many.
But it's understandable, huh? It's understandable. You see, Pakistan was born after the partition of India.
Yeah.
And Bangladesh was born after the partition of Pakistan and after a bloody civil war. Now, you see, when Master Tara Singh, he was defeated by General Ayub Khan because Ayub Khan wanted to appease the Sikhs in India.
Yeah.
But Master Tara Singh was publicly, a woman threw her shoe at her when he appeared in public in Pakistan. That woman was Punjabi.
Yeah.
And she said, "He's the murderer of my family."
Okay.
Because the Sikhs, they killed a lot of Muslims. Now, a lot of Sikhs were killed as well in West Punjab. And but in East Punjab, there were a lot more Muslims in East Punjab than there were Hindus and Sikhs in West Punjab. So the East Punjabs, a lot of them were massacred, women were raped, and then the rest of them moved to West Punjab. And if they would exhibit hatred of the Sikhs, then it is understandable, right? So the Bengalis now, well, it was a very bloody civil war. And the Pakistan army fought a civil war in that land. A lot of people were killed. A lot of a national myth of Bangladesh was formed after that civil war, that we won independence from Pakistani army oppressors. So if people in that country have this idea, then I wouldn't say it's a correct idea, because the history of that civil war is very complex and both sides were deeply involved in the carnage. But these nuances, they do not reach the common people a lot of times. They don't study that much. They don't delve into it deep enough. Most of the time, they would hear an uncle or an aunt tell some horrific episode about the Pakistan army in 1971, and that would be it. That would be their whole historical knowledge about the episode. But they would make a very opinionated belief that Pakistan army are devils, and that is very much buttressed by the Bangladeshi state as well. The hatred is institutionalized through even textbooks. So then it's not very uh, surprising to see that the Bangladeshis are like that, some of them at least. On the other hand, if we talk about Pakistan, now Pakistanis have in West Pakistan, a lot of them barely knew what was happening in East Pakistan. Only the families of the martyred soldiers would know.
Yeah.
Thousands of them were martyred. And I'm sure that many of them would harbor some ill feelings towards the Bangladeshis as well. But these people are very few in number.
Yeah.
So, but on the other hand, in Bangladesh, things happen, it's not only just killing the thing. The army did conduct such operations. For instance, if I were a Bengali and I was sitting peacefully in my home and the army would come, break down the door, destroy a lot of property, hurl a couple of abuses at me, and then leave.
Yeah.
Without touching even my family, I would still say these people are thugs.
You still have
Wouldn't
resentment. Yes, you would still
I would
have
have resentment. So
Yes.
these things happen. It's not only just the killings or stuff, it's these things as well.
No, but
So we have to understand that.
But I think, I mean, it's okay to have this kind of feeling as against the army who you perceive, from a Bangladeshi point of view, if they perceive the army oppressed. But I'm talking about general Pakistani people, okay, who have nothing to do with it. Most people in Pakistan had almost no contact with East Pakistan. It was like,
Yeah,
it was not
no,
on their
it's
radar.
not good. It's not good. But actually, the hatred has been institutionalized at the state level in Bangladesh as well.
That's what I think.
That also plays a very important part in that. So, and that must have been countered, but even Pakistan did neglect that. And in Bangladesh, it's in the political benefit of many in power to actually fuel that hatred further instead of cooling it down.
Yeah, that's what the issue. Okay, Dr. Hassan, we'll take a short break and we'll join you shortly. Okay?
Yep.
Okay, welcome back, Dr. Hassan. So we continue our discussion. And I was saying, I reached out to people and I was talking to them. And the auntie of a very good friend of mine, he's been my friend for about 20 years. And she, not now, but personally accounted a story to me where somebody she knew was raped by Pakistan army. So we will get to the scale of atrocities later, but did any of these incidents actually occur, even one or a few or however many, during the operation before the 1971 and also during the 1971 war?
Well, not before, but after the civil war started in March 1971, these things, unfortunately, yes, they did happen.
Okay. Yeah, and as we said, we started out by saying no matter who and which side did it, it is a heinous and condemnable actions.
Yes, it is very condemnable. But you see, civil wars are always very brutal. This is a characteristic of these wars because usually civil war, it sounds like a paradoxical word, civil and war. But the situation, the disharmony, when it reaches an alarming extent, only then civil war breaks out. So when that barrier is crossed, then it's usually very savage. Now, the Pakistan army, it has been maligned a lot for what it did not do. But if you are asking me that these incidents happened or didn't happen, then yes, a few did. Even Siddiq Salik has mentioned in
Yes.
his book, Witness to Surrender, that 9 Pakistan army soldiers who raped Bengali women were actually hanged
Yeah.
via court martial. So these incidents did happen. The army even punished some people who did such things. So this is, yes, the unfortunately these did happen, but yes, the army did try to punish these perpetrators as well. So that was actually a good thing that hasn't been brought out in the open. I don't know why. And I did find out about it after much research that the army did actually not only tried some people for this crime, but also hanged them, gave them the capital punishment.
So on this topic, I want you to briefly describe the background. We're not going to go into what they did. We'll talk about it a little bit later. So we know in the war there were armies of Pakistan and India, and we will also talk about that. But I read an article by Indian Telegraph on the 29th of April 2021 where they talk about Mukti-Bahni, and they quote the numbers of Mukti-Bahni to be 70,000. So who were the Mukti-Bahni? Who trained them? What were they doing?
Now, Mukti-Bahni, Mukti is freedom, Bahni is army. It was a rebel force that's task was to evict West Pakistan from their country that they refer to as Bangladesh. They wanted to remove East Pakistan and create Bangladesh in its place. Now, who were they? Actually, the first of the Mukti-Bahni were former members of Pakistani state forces, the East Bengal Regiment of the Pakistan Army, Pakistan Air Force, Pakistan Navy, some people from East Pakistan Police, East Pakistan Rifles, that is the paramilitary border guarding force. India has BSF, Border Security Force. In Punjab, there are Punjab Rangers. In KPK, there's the Frontier Corps. So in East Pakistan, it was the East Pakistan Rifles, almost entirely composed of East Pakistanis. So thousands of men from these organizations, when they rebelled, they become the Mukti-Bahni. And then some youth, normal students and village youth, they also started joining up. Some people, they became refugees across the border, and young people from those refugee camps, some of them did join. And India provided actually all the logistical support, all the weapons, and all the training for Mukti-Bahni, a fact that has been acknowledged very proudly by the Indians.
So the Indian Telegraph, it quotes the numbers to be 70,000. In your
Yeah, it
opinion,
has been
is that
reported
higher or lower?
from no. It's 70,000 to 100,000. Most estimates place them between 70 to 100,000, but there are higher ones as well. But these 70,000 to 100,000 were those people who received proper military training, spanning many weeks and months, and by the Indian military.
So, it is not possible for 70,000 or 100,000 people to operate, and be supplied, have logistical lines and stuff without
Yeah, there
a
were
state backing them up.
more than 100 camps, launch pads, training grounds located in the vicinity of the border and guarded by the Indian Army and border security forces. And in May 1971, the Indian Army took overall command of this whole operation. And they very in broad daylight they did this, and they have never even bothered to deny it after 1971.
Okay.
So it was blatant interference in a sovereign state. But you see, an international law is no law at all, it is said, and that is true. It's the law of the jungle. So nobody castigated India for it because they had won that war. So you don't say, nobody ever says to the victor that you're wrong.
History is written by the victors many times, as
Yeah,
they say.
yeah.
Okay, so we will specifically talk about what they did later. So this was a brief introduction to Mukti-Bahni. Let's now turn to Pakistan Army. So these official numbers and stats are easily available. So Pakistan Army at the height of its deployment in East Pakistan had 1 corps, 3 divisions, comprising of roughly 34,000 regular soldiers and about 10,000 irregular soldiers. They had no more than 45,000 soldiers. No. everybody included. So where did the idea of 90,000 surrendering come from when they didn't even have 90,000 deployed in East Pakistan?
Well, these are the military men. I think there were about 45,000 from Army, Navy, and Air Force, the uniformed personnel.
Yes.
But there were thousands of civilians, and there were thousands of West Pakistanis who were working with the army as cooks, as builders, etc., etc., and the civil servants and the civil officials and some members of the East Pakistan police that had been brought from West Pakistan during 1971. So the rest of the 45 or 48,000, actually it was said that 93,000 was the total number of prisoners of war. India had less than half of them belong to the armed forces. And this tactic is used actually to magnify the victory as well and the humiliation of the defeated or surrendering side. It has been used by Israel as well. Like in 1967, the Israelis captured some thousands of Arab soldiers. But what they did was that in the captured area, they in many villages, they just took out the male population and included them in the prisoners of war. So these things, they're also used as bullying tactics against the enemy. You have, if there are 45,000 hostages, it's better to have 93,000 hostages. And then there's also the fact, many of these civilians, they could have escaped the Indian army. But they themselves were also willing to surrender to the Indian army and be taken in by Indian protection because of two reasons. The first reason was that the rumor in East Pakistan at that time was that these people would not become prisoners of war. They would be repatriated to Pakistan, West Pakistan. And the second thing was that the Mukti-Bahni and other non-Mukti-Bahni Bengali armed mobs were roaming all over East Pakistan in the frenzy of victory and just killing and maiming and torturing any West Pakistani they could find. So they thought it was safe to surrender to the Indian army. Now, the first reason might have born out of wishful thinking, because a person, he would lie to himself to make himself feel better. So they would say, oh no, we'll be back in West Pakistan in 2 weeks via the Indian railways. Well, the Indians weren't there, as they say in Urdu, Susralis who would just send them over. But that is what they told themselves. But the real reason is probably the second reason. They didn't want to get stuck in East Pakistan. For instance, there's a memoir by Masood Mufti, a bureaucrat stationed in East Pakistan during 1971. Now, Masood Mufti said that there were dozens of senior civil servants who were working in East Pakistan during 1971, and they had taken refuge in the Hotel Intercontinental in Dhaka.
Yes.
So Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, when he came back to Bangladesh, he actually addressed them and offered them that please join the civil service of Bangladesh, and we need people like you, and there will be no problems. But almost all of them opted to go into Indian captivity rather than make the Awami League the masters of their fate. So they became prisoners of war and stayed in India for the next couple of years.
So they must have seen something on the ground to actually opt
No,
for
they
Indian
did
captivity.
actually. It was very clear. They were being international media outlets also reported them. Interestingly, sometimes it's a bit of a dark comedy that many Bengalis or Indians on social media, they're actually saying Pakistan army did this and that, and they share some pictures with the soldier bayoneting a civilian and stuff like that. And those pictures actually are of West Pakistanis and Biharis that were being tortured to death by Bengalis on 16th or 17th of December. And these pictures were taken by the Western correspondents who had come in with the Indian army to Dhaka. So there was reality in that, of course. But that is why the number became so inflated. Even many Bengalis, even some Bengalis wanted to, the pro-Pakistan Bengalis wanted to be repatriated, but the Indians refused to admit them. For instance, there were some paramilitary forces like the Al-Badr, and some members of those forces did actually want to surrender alongside the Pakistan army and be counted as prisoners of war, but they weren't given that right, and many of them were mercilessly butchered afterwards.
Okay. And we will talk about that point in a second. The second point, again, facts and figures. Roughly 45,000 Pakistani soldiers fought against 3 corps, 9 divisions of Indian Army, who crossed, a 2,700-kilometer border, 200,000 Indian soldiers against 45,000 Indian soldiers. And while Pakistan Army was doing that, there was, let's say, between 70,000 and 100,000 Mukti-Bahni trained insurgents inside Bangladesh. How was that possible for this army to do 200,000 rapes while it was doing all of this stuff?
Well, it was not. It's an absurd allegation that has no basis in any research. It was just a number that was floated to demonize the Pakistan Army. Now, and you see, when the operation broke out on the 25th of March, 1971, the West Pakistanis were much numerically inferior than the East Pakistanis. You say 45,000. At that time, there was only one division in East Pakistan, and that was its strength was about 15,000 people. And a majority of that division was composed of Bengali soldiers who rebelled.
Okay.
So Pakistan Army, 7, 8, 10,000 West Pakistanis in total, including some paramilitary soldiers and EPR and police, etc. They were facing almost twice, thrice the numbers of Bengalis, armed, trained Bengali soldiers from the EPR, from the police, and from, most dangerously, from the East Bengal regiment.
Yeah.
And you see, there's a very famous anecdote that how Major Ziaur Rahman, who later became the president of Bangladesh, actually killed his CO, the commanding officer of his unit, with his own hands. And there were rapes and horrific atrocities done upon the families of those soldiers who had been killed, especially in Chittagong and some other areas like Kushtia. So, but despite, and interestingly, the Americans, the Americans, they're a world power and they have their eye on all the affairs going on around the world. And initially, the American State Department, it had prophesied, it has assessed that the West Pakistanis would lose out because they are so few and the Bengalis are so much more.
Okay.
And East Pakistan civil war will be over quickly. But the West Pakistani army, it showed great skill in overcoming that. But that means that they had their hands full fighting against the rebels who were more numerous than them. How could they have been raping or doing other stuff? And then there's this ridiculous figure of hundreds of thousands of women raped by the Pakistan army. This is just absurd. If there were 45,000 soldiers of the Pakistan army, that means that every one of them raped, I think, 4 or 5 women. Now, is it really believable?
Yeah.
Even the Nazis, who had subhumanized, dehumanized their enemies, their statistics are much lower. And then there's the other figure as well, that of 3 million killed. Actually, the rape figure came later. The first figure that was touted was 3 million killed. It was actually cooked up out of thin air by the Pravda, the Soviet Union official newspaper, at the end of December 1971. And if you read Mujibur Rahman's speech when he came back to Bangladesh, he mentions at one time 3 lakh, and then he mentions 3 million. So actually he was told 3 lakh, and he said 3 million by mistake. And then he said, okay, I have said 3 million, so it's going to be 3 million.
3 million.
And Abdul Momin, he has done some very good research about it. And he has said that an official inquiry was made. And even projections showed that the total number of people killed wouldn't exceed 70,000 or 74,000, I think. That's what he mentioned. And that was when Mujibur Rahman threw aside the report and said, what garbage is this? I have said 3 million, so it will be 3 million. And so the myth of 3 million was born. Now, if you're saying that the Pakistani army killed 3 million people and it was an army of killers and rapists, then you have to have a corresponding number of women raped as well.
Yeah.
So that's how that number came into place. That didn't mean that Pakistani army didn't kill some innocent people. It didn't mean that rapes weren't committed. But this figure, was a political figure, and it was touted by India and Bangladesh, and this was for their political benefit. And when I say Bangladesh, I mean here Awami League. Now, Awami League, it has all its political capital in 1971, because after 1971, the Awami League is literally one of the worst parties ever to have governed the country. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, he misgoverned the country so much that it is the only example in history that a man much loved by the people, millions of people of Bengal, was actually butchered in cold blood
Assassinated. Yes.
3.5 years later. And the Bengalis, they hated him and his family so much that no one even shed a tear. And
Yeah.
there were people dying of famine. And Mujibur Rahman had his sons married and placed gold crowns on the hands of his on the heads of his sons and his
Daughter-in-law.
daughter-in-laws, and it was in so much bad taste. That was just one example of corruption going on, and thousands of people were killed by his paramilitary army, the Mukti-Bahni, and even officers were kidnapped, their families were kidnapped. It was a horrific story of economic mismanagement and thuggery and basically just loot and rapine and plunder. So that man, when he died, then the only thing left to his credit was 1971. And the Awami League, in building a cult of personality of Mujib, has to make a demon, has to create a demon whom the hero Mujib fought. That's how symbolism works.
Yeah.
So what better a demon can be found than the Pakistan army, who fought a bloody civil war in East Pakistan. So they created those figures to generate hate and fuel political capital for the Awami League. And then there's the Indian angle. The Indians know that Islam is a potent force, and they have always hated Pakistan because of its Islamic identity. They didn't want this country coming into being. And the Indians, they know that even if Bangladesh has been separated, it's still a Muslim country, still a Muslim majority country. And if Pakistan and Bangladesh ever develop a synergy again, it will be more dangerous than a united Pakistan. Because in a united Pakistan, the West Pakistani elite was actually buggering it all up, and East and West Pakistan were consistently at loggerheads, and East Pakistan wasn't being run very well as well. But the Bengali people, now they're running their own country, and they are doing a good job, I guess, good enough job. And I hope that they improve and make their country more powerful as well. And I similarly hope that Pakistan becomes powerful as well. So if these two countries, these powerful countries, if they become so, and they discover their Islamic ideology as well, so they would be like two states and one nation. That sort of a concept. There would be two independent countries who would have their Islamic ideology, and India believes this is an anathema. So what better way to discourage the Islamic ideology and identity of Bangladesh than by saying that, see, the propagators of that Islamic ideology were genocidal and raping maniacs. And they were those people who raped your women, who killed your millions of people, who destroyed your country. This is what Islam did to you. This is what Islamic ideology propagators are like. This is what Pakistan was. Pakistan is an idea. It's not just a piece of land. Pakistan exists everywhere where there is prominence of the Islamic ideology. Wherever a person says that Islam is the basis of my ideology, and I'm an ethno-nationalist later, I am a member of a tribe later, I'm a Muslim first, then that is an vindication of the idea of Pakistan.
Yeah. I would like to just...
that is what India is afraid of, and that is why they peddle these myths endlessly. And God works in mysterious ways. The myths, they were debunked by an Oxford professor who is a Bengali Hindu.
Yes.
So her research speaks for itself.
So just let me summarize those numbers. And for anybody who knows these numbers, let me put this into your head. So what these numbers, the rapes of 90,000, and it's actually quoted by Guardian and newspapers like that. So let's just consider these numbers and how absurd they are. What these 90,000 rapes would mean, that each Pakistani soldier, while fighting an insurgency, 2.5 times its size locally, and fighting an Indian force 4 times their size, raped 4 women, almost 4 women. It's an impossibility. Those numbers just do not line up.
Yeah, they also said 400,000, so that would raise the number to 9 women.
9 women or something like that. It's just absurd. So let me ask you this. Have there been any Bangladeshi studies, fact-based judicial inquiries, or has this been submitted to the International Court of Justice or United Nations is saying they were 200,000 rapes and 3 million kills, and here's the evidence
No,
of
there has
genocide.
been nothing. There has been nothing of the sort. Actually, two women, both from India, who conducted research into this, were actually welcomed by Bangladesh at first when they said, we are going to research into this genocide. And Yasmin Sekia and Sharmila Bose. And when they actually started doing research, they were both discouraged a lot, and they faced a lot of bullying as well from the Bangladeshi authorities and even some people as well. And both of them were actually welcomed in Pakistan, and all the archives were opened and they were facilitated in any way they could be for their research. So that tells you a lot as well, because this lie, this is so absurd that even any reasonable person would know that this is just an invention. Now, in the article that you mentioned that I wrote for South Asia Times, I actually did a little comparison, and that means that in 9 months, 45,000 Pakistani soldiers killed. Each of those soldiers killed 67 people and raped 9 women while defending a 2,700-kilometer long border. And 4,000 of them actually were martyred. So almost a casualty rate of 10%. 10% casualty rate is a huge casualty rate.
Huge.
You know, if the casualty rate comes to 25 to 30%, the unit loses its integrity.
Its cohesion, to fight.
Yeah. So they had a 10% casualty rate. They were fighting continuously. They were dying continuously. And you're saying that they were killing innocent people and then raping women as well. Now, if you compare, the Germans killed 6 million Jews allegedly in World War II. Now, the 6 million number, that is also contested. But if we accept it as true, then on the Eastern Front of the Second World War, there were about more than 3 million German soldiers. And these were German soldiers. I'm not counting the SS, which was actually a proper army.
SAS,
So 3 million men took 6 years to kill 6 million people. And in 8 months, 45,000 Pakistani army soldiers murdered 3 million people and raped 400,000 women. Now, that is absolutely absurd. That is nothing more than a giant rumor, as Sharmila Bose says. Now, I'll recount to you a couple of episodes. There was I just saw a post on social media on Twitter 2-3 years ago. There was a girl and she was celebrating the fact that she had been accepted into Yale to study law. She was Bangladeshi, and she shared her essay. And in her essay, she said that the Pakistani army killed this and this, 3 million people, raped 400,000 women. And that story of our independence gives me power and gives me a context about my life and etc., that any hardship can be overcome. So then I just wrote beneath it these same figures. And I said that the people at Yale, well, either they are malevolent or they are completely negligent of the fact that they are legitimizing, if they are legitimizing these numbers by their actions, then, well, then it astounds me that any historian of repute would actually say that these numbers are absurd, and they have. You read Sissa and Rose, they have written the same thing. Even the Indians were claiming 300,000 to 500,000, according to Sisson and Rose. Both of whom are not Pakistani. Sharmila Bose, not Pakistani, granddaughter of Sarat Chandra Bose, actually, a Congress leader who was against Pakistan. Yasmin Sekia, not Pakistani. Abdul Momin Chaudhry, not Pakistani. So you are just, the government of Bangladesh, the Awami League government, is just peddling a lie to cement the hatred between East Pakistan and West Pakistan. There's nothing more to it. There's no truth in it. And there's another episode, a guy, he came to me and he said, oh, you are saying so much things about that this genocide didn't occur, that didn't occur. And have you even read the Hamoodur Rahman Commission report, which actually researched these things and implicated your army? And I said, yes, have you? He said, yes, I have. I said, okay, then did you read the part where in the Hamoodur Rahman Commission report it is written that only 30,000 people were killed in total? And he was like, oh, I was like, you haven't read that report then? He said, okay, oh, I skipped it. I said, then you shouldn't say things like that. Do some actual research.
So let me
Hamoodur Rahman
interrupt you, because that's
Commission.
very important point, right? Okay, for our listeners, briefly introduce Justice Hamoodur Rahman Commission report. What was it?
Yeah.
Who, so they
Actually,
have some
Hamoodur
context.
Rahman was also a Bengali,
Okay.
and he was the Chief Justice of Pakistan. So he was charged by the the Pakistani government after 1971 to inquire into the causes of the East Pakistan separation.
Okay.
And Hamoodur Rahman's hands were tied because he was limited. His report was limited to the purview of only investigating the military acts and the acts of the political acts and the military acts of the military, because the military was in political power as well. The role of the politician was not in that report's purview, because Bhutto was the prime minister and he didn't want his sins to be unmasked anyway, though they were out in the open, his sins, but again, he didn't want them part of the report. So he restricted Hamoodur Rahman to only investigate the army. And Hamoodur Rahman did investigate the army, and he actually, it was a very well-researched report, and they made some very good points, and they found out a lot of stuff that was not going right in East Pakistan, like the command of General Niazi and some corrupt activities by many Pakistan army officers, generals. And but the Hamoodur Rahman Commission report, I must say, it was very objective. And they said that in the Eastern Command reports, they themselves have mentioned that we have killed 30,000. And the Hamoodur Rahman Commission report understandably makes the point that in 1971, the army didn't know it was going to be defeated. And it is more likely that they inflated those figures
Okay.
of people killed to show their performance in combating the rebels. So the number might be lower. But then there were also, or not only the army was operating, there were also paramilitary forces, most of them recruited through Biharis and Bengalis from East Pakistan. And they also killed a lot of people. Like in Sharmila Bose's book, there are accounts of massacres committed of Bengalis, mostly Hindus, in East Pakistan. And the details show that some of them were indeed committed by the army, in which hundreds of people were killed, but some of them were committed not by the army, but by the paramilitary organizations. And there was connivance of the locals in that, because you see, if a massacre occurs, then the army moves on. But the rest of the people, they are there to loot the stuff of the people killed or who have fled the massacre. So there was a Hindu camp near the border in East Pakistan, and that camp was fired upon, and dozens or hundreds of Hindus, East Pakistani Hindus, were killed, and others fled. And that massacre was actually committed because of the locals who had actually reported to the authorities that these people are terrorists, these are Mukti-Bahnis, whatever, because they wanted two things. First, they wanted to loot those people. And secondly, they wanted to get a lot of fees from them, the boat fare for them to cross into India, across the river.
Okay.
So these things happened back then. But if you say, 3 million killed and 400,000, and then if anybody talks about that, then I know that this is just propaganda, and that person actually has never bothered to do any real research about the topic, or he's so partisan that he or she has closed his eyes to what actually happened there. And a fact that must always be mentioned here, that in East Pakistan, not only Bengalis were killed, but Bengalis were only killed between 25 March 1971 and 16 December 1971. But a lot of pro-Pakistan Bengalis and Biharis and West Pakistanis, they were killed before 25 March 1971. They were killed between 25 March 1971 and 16 December 1971. And a lot of them were killed after 16 December 1971.
Okay. Here, I read your article, in South Asia Times, and I'm actually surprised. So I grew up in Pakistan. I went to school in Pakistan, right? And this part of history, I was never taught. Okay. So I'm going to quote you from your own article, the testimony of Sakina Bibi from Nilmati. And she reads, "Our Bengali captors detained us in 6 huts. For the first 3 days, we did not have a morsel of food. We lived on water and wild fruits picked from the trees. All through the period of our captivity, the hapless captive women were subjected to multiple rapes. 6 teenage girls who tried to escape were shot on April 10th, 1971, when the Pakistani troops routed the rebels. The retreating Bengalis tried to slaughter all of us, but we were rescued in the nick of time." Why why is this part of history not taught to us in Pakistan I never read any of this.
Well, it was actually suppressed during 1971 as well, because it was thought that this would encourage anti-Bengali sentiment in West Pakistan, and there were millions of Bengalis living in West Pakistan, and they could have faced the fury of the locals in West Pakistan. That was a flawed premise. The victims deserved that their side of the story must also have been shared. And then now it isn't even taught. Now nothing is taught about 1971. Mostly this part is left ignored. This brutal vivisection of the country is left mostly ignored. And only those who are deeply interested in that topic move away from the platitudes and do some actual research about it. We as a nation don't give much importance to history, and that is why we never learn from it, and that is why, unfortunately, we are condemned to repeat it. But the fact is that in the interest of historical perspective, these things must be told as well. Just like the tales of the Bengalis um, who were wronged, who were killed or maimed or looted, they also must be told, not just by Pakistani soldiers or Pakistani paramilitary, but by the Indian military and paramilitary as well. See, there were a lot of rapes committed in the border areas by the BSF, who wore the khaki vardi like the Pakistan Army. And it was part of an organized campaign by the BSF to sow the seeds of hatred against Pakistan Army in the border areas during 1971. And this part you can read in the book 1971, Fact or Fiction, I think that is its name, written by Ambassador Afrasiab, who served as Pakistani ambassador to Bangladesh and himself interviewed some people who had witnessed this aspect as well of the Indian brutality. So the Indians, they were very smart, and they did everything to fan the flames of hatred between erstwhile brothers. Now, to balance that, it must be told that how the West Pakistanis or the Bihari women and men suffered. And it is in the interest of both Pakistan and Bangladesh to effect a real reconciliation. Now there comes the question of apology. People say Pakistan should apologize in Bangladesh. Well, Pakistan has apologized actually twice, but it is just a ploy by the Bangladeshi government, especially under Awami League tenures. Demand is made, completely ignoring the fact that Pakistan has apologized twice. Bangladesh has never apologized. In the interest of reconciliation, it's not enough to apologize anyway. It must be a comprehensive historical research and study must be done. Findings by both countries must be done and compiled, and then a narrative should be created that must be based on truth instead of political point scoring. Unfortunately, we do not live in an ideal world, and I scarcely even hope that that is going to happen. I don't think that's going to happen. That should happen, but that is not going to happen. So then if that's not going to happen, then at least the history must be represented in an unadulterated form in Pakistan, at least, to make the people learn from history, and in Bangladesh. Now, we don't have authority in Bangladesh. I hope that some enlightened government comes to power that tackles these issues objectively instead of being politically insecure about them. But it is easier for the Pakistani government to tackle these issues objectively because there is no political point scoring involved. So this should be taught, and this has actually a lot of books have been written about the genocide, and this is not my term. Sharmila Bose has used this term for the killings and the treatment that the non-Bengalis faced in East Pakistan during 1971. She has said that it is arguable that the Pakistani army committed a genocide of Hindus, East Pakistani Hindus, according to the UN definition of genocide in 1971. Now, it's arguable. You can say they did or they didn't. There are arguments for both. It is completely false that the Pakistani army committed genocide of Bengalis during 1971. But it is completely a fact that a non-Bengali genocide occurred in East Pakistan in 1971 and 1972.
Okay, let
So,
me
and that is the verdict of a historian who is well regarded. She's an Oxford professor, a scholar, and if she were to be biased, then one would say she would be biased against Pakistan being a Bengali Hindu from West Bengal and being the granddaughter of Sarat Chandra Bose.
So let me
But
just
kudos to her. Her intellectual integrity left me very impressed.
let me just balance this. In the beginning of this interview, I talked about the auntie of a good friend of mine. Let me balance it by saying an auntie of mine, she's Pashtun. So when my father was stationed in Bangladesh, her father owned one of the biggest pots and pans manufacturing factory in Dhaka. He was Pashtun. She was 14 years old. In the war of 1971, what she said, and she still remembers to this day, and she said the Mukti-Bahni stormed the factory, destroyed the factory, set it on fire, right? And because they were Pashtun, some Pashtun guards were there, things like that. They were killed, their families were harmed, and when they came to Pakistan, they actually had to run to Karachi, give bribe, the right little bit before the war, and they basically escaped with just their clothes on their back. And this is her testimony. She goes, he was one of the biggest businessmen in Dhaka, okay, and they were there. They actually lived in Bangladesh despite being Pashtun, even before the partition of India. Her grandfather had the factory and it grew the business. So this is her testimony right here.
Yes, there's another. I will tell you another anecdote. The guy who's sitting with me, a friend, Saif Kazmi, in that video that I shared, was asking me the question in that video. Now, Saif also told me an incident of an auntie of his who was the wife of a military officer stationed in East Pakistan. And in March 1971, he was killed by his colleagues. And his batman, the valet, he was a Bengali, he cut his head off after he was killed. And he brought the head and threw it in front of the missus and said, Shab Kashar hai, and body is lying in the cantonment, but you wouldn't be able to collect it. So here's his head for you.
Okay. So,
and also there were many, if we are talking about rapes as well, then yes, many ghastly tales reported in Qutbuddin Aziz's book, Blood and Tears as well. Now, Qutbuddin Aziz also, I think the numbers mentioned by him are also a bit inflated. But the incidents and the eyewitnesses that he has interviewed, they have been there. And even Anthony
Dr. Hassan,
Mascarenhas.
let me stop you for a short break and then we'll come back. And because we need to talk about this topic a little bit. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, welcome back, Dr. Hassan. So let me now talk about, as I alluded to before the breaks, this topic is not taught to us in Pakistan in the studies. If you read the Guardian article, they barely touch upon it in a few lines. They're saying, there were atrocities from both sides. What was the role of Mukti-Bahni and Indian military and paramilitary forces and others of similar rapes, genocide, killings, etc., to those who were opposed to the separation of East Pakistan and creation of Bangladesh?
Yeah. Now, interestingly, there is a pattern as well. Like the atrocities committed by Pakistan Army, as mentioned by Bose as well as other sources as well, they followed a pattern. Pakistani Army did use profiling, and the most suspect individual they would consider would be a young Hindu male, and they would target that disproportionately. So the Pakistan Army's atrocities were more in the region of that they were looking for rebels, and sometimes on a low suspicion even they would resort to killing. But there are miscreants everywhere in these organizations. There were some who committed acts like rape as well, and some of them were even punished by the army. Similarly, Mukti-Bahni, Indian Army, the BSF, as I have said before, they were actually in the border areas, they were using rape as a tactic to defame the Pakistan Army. But when they actually did invade East Pakistan, there were incidents of rapes, not just of non-Bengalis or anti-Pakistan elements, but even normal local Bengalis as well, because the conquering army also came with its share of miscreants who did commit these acts. Similarly, in the Mukti-Bahni, there were also some people with such diseased mentality who did these things. But the major chunk of these atrocities against women and children, especially rape, if we count all sides of the conflict, that was committed by mobs. See, mobs, as Freud himself has written in his book Group Psychology, that in mob, the inhibition is lowered. Like if a person drinks, his inhibitions are lowered, he turns into a scoundrel. He would be more promiscuous towards women. He would be more uninhibited. Similar as a reaction in a mob. If you are alone, you would fear that you would be held accountable for your actions. But if you are in a frenzied mob, you would not care what you do because it's all in the collective. There are 1,000 people raping and killing, and who would catch you doing anything? So in East Pakistan, the same thing happened. The Pakistan army, they were soldiers who were hunting rebels. The Mukti-Bahni, most of them, they were soldiers hunting Pakistan army. And the Indian army, it was fighting a war against Pakistan army. But the mobs, they didn't have any such pressing responsibilities.
Okay.
All they had to do was to pillage, plunder, and rape. And that is what they did. And that is why the horrific mass rapes and massacres occurred in even like in a single place called Santahar. It's a very small place. Thousands of non-Bengalis were killed. And you see, there are bright spots as well. Where there are miscreants, there are heroes as well. There was a guy named Halim Tadiwala. Now, he used to sell wine, but he was also a devotee of a local shrine and a practicing Muslim. And Tadiwala was actually a fan of Sheikh Mujib, and he had donated to the Awami League election campaign as well. And he didn't like the Pakistan army. Obviously, he supported Sheikh Mujib and his quest for freedom, as maybe we can say, against the Pakistan army. But Tadiwala was also a compassionate human being. And when he saw the killings and the massacres, he harbored many people in his vast Haveli, the non-Bengalis, the Biharis. And the local Bengali mobsters, they had no connection to the Mukti-Bahni. They were just local men who just had now their opportunity to loot, plunder, and rape hundreds of people, hundreds of women. And they've just said to him, to the Tariwala, that you're a Bengali, you should just leave these people to us. And he said, no, as a Muslim, I cannot do that. As a human, I cannot do that. You go and buzz off. And first gently, and then he was besieged, his Haveli was besieged, and he stayed till the end. And he was killed by the mob as well, along with many Bengalis who weren't pro-Pakistan. They were just human beings, Muslims, who were trying to stop a horrific atrocity. And I would say that they were martyred, and may Allah forgive his sins and accept him in the highest ranks of Jannah for this act of his. But what about the mobsters? And there were incidents, they were even selling Bihari women into India as after kidnapping them. Such horrific incidents also happened, but these were fringe elements of the society who were brought into the mainstream by that bloody civil war. So you cannot say that the Bengalis did it. One must always say that the miscreants and the mobs and the people with loose morals and bad people, they actually did those things. And same goes for the Pakistan army. It wasn't the Pakistan army. The Pakistan army was fighting a war, and most of them were fighting a clean war. But there were some who committed atrocities, who took advantage of their position and did horrific and heinous acts. And the Indian army, for the Indian army, it was a different game. It was like, it was a game of statecraft as mentioned by Chanakya. And they aren't bound by the Islamic values of morality as well. So if raping women helps them win a war, then they would do it, and they did do it.
Then so be it.
Yeah, so they did do it. So that was the only element of organized criminal rape, if that was committed. I guess that was committed by the Indian army in East Pakistan and the BSF, not by the Pakistan army and not even by the Mukti-Bahni.
Okay. One more thing. You mentioned that Pakistan has apologized twice for what happened in 1971. When did
twice
that happen?
Officially.
When did this happen?
Well, there was first, it was even in it was written in the Delhi Agreement 1974 that the Pakistani Prime Minister appealed for forgiveness from the Bengalis for all the atrocities that occurred during 1971. And then President Musharraf himself went to a monument in Bangladesh when he visited Bangladesh, and he also apologized there. So that's, in my knowledge, that's twice. And I think there are other episodes as well of informally apologizing. Bangladesh has never apologized for the atrocities against the West Pakistanis and Biharis. India has never apologized for its acts and its war crimes during the War of 1971. India has never apologized for all of its atrocities in Kashmir as well, or in other areas as well. So, but Pakistan has, and I think it was a good thing to apologize. Even if the Bangladeshis didn't, it was good of us to apologize, because it cannot be ignored that atrocities did occur, significant atrocities occurred from our side. And one must not wait to do the right thing for the other to do the right thing, especially when you're dealing with brothers.
Okay.
Now, if dealing with India or other nations, it's real politic. But I think that when dealing with Bangladesh, well, it's a Muslim country. It's a country that gained its independence with Pakistan in 1947, and we share a lot of bonds, ideological bonds with the Bangladeshi Muslim people. And so it was good that we apologized. But if our apology is made into a diplomatic tool of real politics and local politics by the Indians and the Awami League, then by all means, we need not play along. And since we have apologized, there's no point in apologizing again
Anymore,
and again and again and again.
again.
It's
Okay.
just then it becomes a diplomatic game. It becomes just a demonizing game that Pakistanis are demons, and they would never accept it anyway. If they haven't accepted when we have done it twice, then that means that what they want is not apology. What they want is political point scoring.
Okay.
So they tell everybody Pakistan isn't apologizing in Bangladesh. It's a lie, but they tell it.
I heard about the hanging of a Jamaat Islami leader by Bangladesh because of the crimes he committed in 1971. So some of those cases have still continued to this day.
Yeah,
What is the
allegedly.
what is the background of that, and why have they continued?
It
I mean,
was,
they've got their
yeah,
independence.
it's the same reason. Just Hasina Wajid, she was facing a vocal opposition, and the Jamaat Islami was part of the opposition alliance as well. And it is very easy to brand Jamaat Islami as traitors because they were pro-Pakistan, the most pro-Pakistan party in 1971, and composed entirely of Bengalis. The Al-Badr force was almost entirely composed of Jamaat Islami cadres, and those boys gave it their all to defend Pakistan. They were left unrecognized in Pakistan, and they were massacred and demonized in Bangladesh. So they were made scapegoats then, and they're made scapegoats now to serve as basically like when Modi wants to assert himself, he does a false flag operation against Pakistan and says, Pakistan ko sabak sikha diya hai. We have taught a lesson to Pakistan. So when Hasina wants to make a point, she says कि रजाकारों को हमने जो है वो we have taken them to task, we have given
The volunteers.
justice to their victims, but it is really just a sham trial, and there was nothing to it actually. But they did give much fanfare to them. They hanged those people because they wanted to make a political statement. They wanted to gain political capital, and they wanted to rouse up those passions about 1971 again to regain the fledgling popularity that Awami League had. Now, it is no secret that Awami League is serving as a surrogate for India, and it is completely Indian backed, and it has hijacked Bangladeshi politics. There are no free elections, there are no free media. Even Kamal Hussain, who was a right hand man of Sheikh Mujib during the negotiations in 1971, served as law minister and conducted the negotiations with Pakistan under Sheikh Mujib when the Delhi agreement was signed as well. Now, Kamal Hussain, his own son-in-law, has been chastened by the Bangladeshi government, has been booked, has been convicted by the Bangladeshi government for saying that the 3 million thing is a rumor. And because, so now these things show that what the Awami League government and Hasina Wajid are actually up to is not justice for the victims, is not for humanity, it's not even for Bengalis. It's only for them to keep their grip on power. Now, to keep power, you need coercion. And if you have a patron like India, it helps. But as a politician, you need some real popularity as well. And if you cannot earn that popularity on the basis of your performance, because your ministers are corrupt and you have built a totally hostage economy to India, and you have just built a rentier system in which some bureaucrats and military officials and politicians, they are becoming richer and richer, and they are controlling the textile industry, etc., then you need something else to gain and ratchet up your popularity. And that is what she is doing by raising the bogey of 1971 again and again, and by flogging the dead horse. Now, there's another interesting but very depressing thing regarding Bangladesh is that their economy, it's not diversified as well at all, and it has some barons, I would say, or robber barons in the textile industry. They are running it as a rentier system with the help of Sheikh Hasina and her Indian backers. Now, the day Sheikh Hasina is forced to leave power in free and fair elections, if there ever happens, then the Awami League would turn against the incumbent government. It would launch, it would brand that government a stooge of Pakistan, and their Indian backers would take their stake out of the economy to punish the new Bangladeshi government. And there's a real chance, unfortunately, that if that happens, the political instability and the Indian hand that pulls out of the Bangladeshi economy can even lead to a devastating crash in Bangladesh.
Economic
And
collapse.
I hope that that does not happen ever. I hope that the Bangladeshi people are able to avert that. But this is a ticking time bomb that will surely burst when Hasina leaves. So not only she is plaguing the country now and binding it to India in servitude, she has compromised her foreign policy and her economy so badly, just in the interest of her own power, that the day she leaves power would be a very perilous day for Bangladesh, because Hasina has put these time bombs into the base of the Bangladeshi economy. So that's the sort of people these people are. And you see the same thing by Bhuttos in Pakistan. Now, these Bhuttos and these Mujibs, they destroyed Pakistan and were instrumental in vivisection of the country, a brutal civil war, a decisive and humiliating defeat at the hands of the Hindus in 1971, just for their own political wealth and power. And they are doing it today. They are doing it again and again and again and again, and they're getting away with it. And the sufferers are the Muslims, the people of Pakistan and Bangladesh.
That is a very good segue, Dr. Hassan. Thank you. And I'd like to request you that in the next episode, we talk about the Zulfikar Ali Bhutto dynasty, not about the individual, but the entire dynasty and what they've done for the last 40 years.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Inshallah.
I appreciate your time. This was long, but we wanted to talk about this topic in a more detailed manner. The previous episodes were shorter. The next ones will be shorter, but this one was exhaustive on purpose. I appreciate your time. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.